Welcome to the Driveline Baseball Podcast. I'm here with Connor White, our Director of High Performance. And today we're going to be talking all things jump testing. What is a jump test? Why do we do it? How is it different than, regular strength testing? What are we even trying to look for? It's been a big part of our process here as we've scaled out our high performance assessment that we do along with our skill assessments here. And so this is just a real deep dive into just what is it? What is it for us? How does it apply across sports? And so, excited to kind of get into it, Connor. But I think the first thing is just for people who hear jump test and don't really know what that is, how could you explain jump testing simply to people?
Yeah, that's a great place to start, Mike. Jump testing across any sport, but we'll obviously look more at baseball. But we're looking to test for athleticism, basically test basic physical properties that are going to translate in ways to sport. So we're trying to keep things as simple as possible, which is why vertical jump is great. It's a test with very little skill. Pretty much everybody, especially younger, college, pro athletes, has been doing some kind of jumping, playing basketball, other sports throughout their life. It's not something that you're going to have to take 5 minutes to teach somebody the skill of. I would say when I started here at Driveline and our test was we were doing velocity-based back squat, bench press testing.
Yeah.
If we're going to test somebody on a back squat, they need to have some kind of skill at actual back squatting for that test. A vertical jump still has some degree of skill, of course, but the skill component of that test is going to be a lot less. So it's a simple way to test general athletic qualities that we can then translate to sport.
So when you say a vertical jump test, what are you testing, or how do you pass a test? What is the output of the assessment?
So it depends a little bit on what kind of technology you're working with. Here we use a dual force plate system. So athletes are standing 1 foot on each plate. What that gives us is not just how high they're jumping, like a vertical mat or a vertimax where they're reaching and touching something, but it's actually telling us the force that they're putting into the ground and with both feet individually. So we can see how fast they're putting force into the ground, how much force they're putting into the ground, and if they're off balance one way or the other, favoring a leg, and more in-depth things like that.
Why would I guess I think it was certainly when we started doing this, I think my first question was why do we care about vertical jumping in baseball? Very, very rarely does vertical jump height matter on the field unless you're snagging a line drive or trying to scale the outfield wall or whatever. It's just that's not a skill that comes up in baseball all that frequently. So why do we care about it and put a bunch of time and attention into it now?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So when I like to think of it, every physical activity, exercise, athletic movement is a picture Venn diagrams. So we've got baseball circle, pitching, swinging, running, and then whatever assessment circle. The overlap there is going to be some degree of physical qualities, putting force into the ground fast, rotating, whatever it is. So for a vertical jump, the skill side of that is pretty small. Like I mentioned earlier, that's one of the reasons why we selected a test like that, is that it's really simple to just jump straight up and down. So the skill component is minimal, so we can be more confident that the sliver that we actually care about, the general physical properties of how much force are you putting into the ground and how fast are you doing it, we can be more confident that we're closer to isolating those.
Oh, so you're saying it's just a simple test. The value of it is that it's very clean to understand force going up.
Exactly. Yeah. We're simplifying so that way we know what we're getting out of it isn't convoluted, or there's not a variety of components involved. We're not worried about, did the athlete get better at jumping or did they get better at putting force in the ground? We can actually isolate.
And that's why the back squat thing matters, because it's okay, if we're going to take these force plates and go down to the Dominican Republic and start testing athletic qualities there, or we're going to take it to a middle school or a high school and test qualities there, you don't want to be giving a 3-hour seminar on the back squat prior to like testing these kids. You just want to be like, hey, jump up and down, and we'll get a good sense. And like that's kind of the value there.
Exactly. Yeah. And then even to continue that with our I think a big component is that test retest value. And so when an athlete gets better, you can be confident that it's because they got better at the properties you were training, not that they got better at the test.
Oh, yeah, yeah. That's true. That's true. There's a big like, like cheating the standardized test kind of thing. Like you get better at the SATs just by like taking a lot of SATs. What I guess like do we use more like talk us through the jumps that we do use, because it's not just like the vertical jump or the way that you would think about testing a vertical jump.
Yeah, so we do 3 jumps right now. We do the counter movement jump, which is going to be closest to your standard vertical jump. The only difference is we put our hands on hips. What that does is it isolates the lower body, because different athletes are going to be better or worse at using that momentum that they can create with their arms, with their upper body. So we want to really just isolate the legs. That way, that property that we're really caring about, that lower body explosive strength, we can be most confident that that's what we're getting the results off of.
And how do you do a counter movement jump? Like what is that?
So we have picture NFL Combine. You got a guy standing on the vert mat, loads up, loads down, jumps as high as he can. Just looks like that, but with hands on hips.
So you start from standing, go down, jump, and then, or go down, like load your jump up and then go.
All in one motion. Yep, just like if
Yeah.
I pulled you aside and said, Mike, jump as high as you can right now. The only thing that would change is putting your hands on your hips.
I would start running. I would run, and that's how I would do, 5 steps minimum. So what are the other ones?
So after that, we do what we call a squat jump or a non-counter movement jump, which is going to be the same thing, except that you have to pause for about 2 to 3 seconds at the bottom. What that does is it kills all the momentum you have, so we can see what the athlete does from a standstill.
Okay.
Third jump is called the repeated hop test. The athlete does 10 pogo hops. Looks similar like they're jumping rope. They're trying to be as quick off the ground as they can, and that's going to tell us more about like reactive strength, bouncy, twitchy, that kind of those kind of properties versus the more like just how high you can jump. It's going to have more of that speed component involved.
And so for us, like, so it's like we've set this up to basically have like a natural jump, then like a pure legs testing, and then we've got something else for like reactivity and athleticism, right? Like those are basically the things that are like the components that we're trying to test to basically go tell a story to an athlete of like, hey, this is where you're at right now, right?
Yeah, telling a story is a great way to put it, because I like to think of them all as just layers of context. We're just trying to find out how much force the athlete can put into the ground, how they do it, and what those strategies are for doing it, because some individuals are going to be better at one jump than the other, and that's going to tell us more than just one of the jumps in isolation. So we're just trying to apply multiple layers of context, and that's why having multiple jumps matters, because different athletes are going to get tasks done in different ways. You can see it done on the mound or on the field, a lot of shapes and sizes for a baseball player, and having different styles of jumps helps us get a better picture of what an individual might do well.
What are the outputs of the tests like? Because I'm sure it's probably hard for guys to like put that in context, right? Like so much of like the when people think of jumping, they just think of like, does he have a 40-inch vertical or not? Like it's like, oh, that's the like throws 95 of the jumping world, and then everybody's like, oh, like, but it doesn't even come out in inches because we've constructed the test differently. So like, what's the output, and like how do we communicate that to guys?
The main outputs we look at first, always tell everybody their jump heights. We use centimeters rather than inches. Part of the reason for that is honestly because with the hands on hips, using the force plates, those numbers are going to look a lot different than what guys are thinking when they're thinking like, oh, 40-inch vert. Seeing from vert mats, anything that they've done before, where their numbers are going to be a lot higher than what they're going to get on a force plate with hands on hips. So it takes a little bit of the ego out of it, keeps it feeling a little bit more scientific. But the metrics we really
With the metric system to remove the ego.
Exactly.
It's a bigger number. It's a bigger
Yeah.
number.
I mean, nobody wants to hear that they have like a 19-inch vert, right?
That's
Um,
right. That's right.
and um, So using the metric system for that, but then the main metrics we're going to pay attention to are going to be closer to the like actual force outputs. So looking at like power, impulse, things like that, and that's where having the force plate is so valuable. Because if
Got
we're
it.
just looking at jump height, obviously like the athlete's frame is going to play a big role in that. Like if two athletes are both 6'2", but one of them's 240 pounds, one of them's 180, it's going to take a lot less force to propel that guy that's 180 up in the air. And what
Yep.
we really care about, like you said at the very beginning, isn't how high you can jump, because that's not going to come up on the field that often. But needing to put force into the ground extremely fast is going to come up everything that you do on the field. So that's what we're actually trying to look at. So looking at things like power, impulse, peak forces, that's where the bang for our buck is going to be.
Yeah, because I think the longer that we've sort of like gone on this journey of developing athletes, like the thing that continues to stand out to me and is like the entire game is largely broken down into like what are the skills that you can accomplish by like putting your hands in the right position. So that's like hitting with like barrel feel, like being able to deliver your hand on time, pitching, picking the ball on defense and like getting a throw off. Like these are all like, functionally like hand skills. And then it's just like, what force can you put in the ground how rapidly? Because it's like that is running, that is how you start your swing, that is how you start your throw. It's like and so like it's obviously probably a bit of a gross oversimplification, but like it was something that I was thinking about coaching a team of 8-year-olds this summer for Little League was just like, like how do I get these kids to just like be a bit more consistent about like the force and the ground stuff, and then because they're 8, they're terrible at the skill stuff anyway. So it's like, and then that translates all the way up to like when you are working with the most skilled athletes, being able to like paint that picture for them as like separating out some of these components to be like, hey, you're good enough on the skill, let's work on the force production stuff, or like vice versa. So how do you think about using those components to then start thinking about how they impact programming for our guys? Like, what are you sitting down and telling these folks, and like how does it sculpt the way that we choose to train them?
Yeah, I think how you phrased it with like the skills and then like the physical side, like ground forces, how fast are you moving, and then like the actual technical stuff, right? Like how good are you at swinging the bat,
Yeah.
flushing the ball, throwing it across the infield, all of that. Like we have the skill component and we have like the physical component. And easy way to think of it, especially these days, college football 25 just came out. When you're looking at your road to glory player or you're trying to develop a guy in dynasty, they've got all these little attributes, right? They got speed, strength, change of direction, and then they also have short route running, intermediate route running, deep route running.
Mm.
It's not going to be much different, right? We're just assigning numbers to those tangibles the same way. You have your force plate assessment, where we're getting your strength, your explosive strength or power, reactive strength, all these components, and then you're going to go either hit or throw in the mocap, and that's where we're going to get those skill ratings, right? We're going to get
Yep.
smash factor, exit velo, swing decisions, things like that. You can
Yeah.
picture that.
The technique
Actually, like
package.
paints a pretty clear picture, right? That same like player chart as you would have on your college football, your 25, your road to glory, except instead of your route running or your throw accuracy, you've got your command, your velo, your sequencing for pitching, and then you've got your same physical ratings. You got your strength, your speed, all those
Yep.
things.
Yeah. Do we see like that a lot of the guys who are like good at putting force in the ground are like end up being the best performers on the skill side of things, or are there still like a decent amount of people in the player population who are that classic like is incredibly strong, sucks at baseball?
So it really changes as guys age. Like when we're looking at youth populations, the best players are almost always the most athletic, And then as it gets older, that correlation is still super, super high. Like the athletic component is still massive.
Yeah.
The stuff on the plates is like strongest stuff in our database in terms of like on-field production correlates. But once you get to like MLB, even MILB levels, the skill is such a separator at that point that the physical qualities are almost more of like a threshold point where it's like you need to meet certain points, and then beyond that, it's how far can your skill take you. Where you don't see very many guys that just like stink on the plates at that level.
Yep.
Everybody is like okay to great, and then the separator is like how good are they at baseball.
Yeah. That's interesting because when I'll take that in a couple of different directions, but I think the first question that I have is like for the younger kids, when you're saying like the best athletes like basically are the best players, like when you say best athletes, like what are you like just the strongest kids, or are you talking about like just the most coordinated, or at that level is strength basically coordination?
That's an interesting one because I think the two go hand in hand, and it kind of depends on how you frame strength.
Sure.
The way that we test strength is through an isometric mid thigh pull. You're basically set up like the top of a deadlift, just pulling on a bar that's not going to move. So not much coordination involved there, right? You're just standing still, pulling on a bar. Technique is very low. So with that in mind, the two are going to be fairly separate. But when you picture like the best kid in your little league, it's usually just the biggest, strongest, fastest kid. Those are the kids that we see in the Little League World Series pumping 80 miles an hour.
Yep.
And typically it's because their frame is ready for it, and they're pretty good at the sport, right?
Is there some element of like motor recruitment basically? Like that's what I was asking about like just coordination is like, like are you seeing that like play into how these kids are testing, and then also like how they're showing up on the field? Because like if you go to practices and whatever, like, or you just go to a random little league game, like usually the kid who is biggest, strongest, fastest also has like a decent amount of the skill stuff dialed in, just because they're coordinated as well. And I'm wondering if you're seeing that as being like correlated, or that's just like a true stepping stone from like, age X to age Y.
I think like definitely correlated, but I do think that they go hand in hand more than just like good athletes tend to be better at sport too.
Sure.
Because I think like that's for a reason, right? Like the properties that are going to be important in producing force, like having physical development, muscle on the frame, but also like the nervous system, like being able to have the body output a tremendous amount of force, tolerate that, do it again and again and again, move very quickly. Most of that's going to be regulated by like the nervous system and how quickly we can tap into that side of things. And that's going to be the same parts of our body that regulate like fine motor patterns and that too. Like if we have a really advanced frame, that's one of the main pieces of the puzzle on both sides for producing force, but also hitting the ball, throwing the ball, those kind of tasks.
Sure. And then like on the other side of things, where you're talking about like more of a pro population, let's say, you were saying like you're seeing guys come in and they're like highly skilled and just like okay at the force production stuff, and then there's guys who are like incredibly elite and like can get away with maybe being less skilled. How do you like evaluate that spectrum, and sort of like what are the thresholds as well? Like where do you have to be where you're just like, oh, if you test this way, like you got no shot?
Yeah, so the biggest thing that we use there, and it's true for all levels, but with all the data that we've been able to collect over the years of doing these tests, we've been able to build out these regressions for getting expected pitch and bat speed. So we can get like a composite score of all of your force plate metrics and tell you how hard you should be swinging the bat or throwing the ball if your mechanics were about average for your population. So how that's really useful is if big leaguer comes in and his tests suggest that he should be swinging at about 68 miles an hour, This guy, obviously great baseball player, he's in the show, is swinging the bat at 72, 73 miles an hour. He's got a difference of 5 miles an hour between those. That tells us that his skill is ahead of his physical. So that's a guy that we know, okay, we should be spending a little bit more time in the weight room this offseason to bring those two together, because with your skill, anything that we put into the tank, you're going to get twice as much out of. And the opposite's true too, right? Where a guy comes in and he's a beast on the plates. Expected bat speed, 74 miles an hour. Expected pitch speed, 94 miles an hour. But he mocaps at 90, or he's swinging the bat at 69. Those guys, we're going to know, okay, this guy's pretty dialed in the weight room. We need to make sure we're getting him enough work in there to maintain where he's at and get ready for a season. But the development's going to shift a little bit more towards getting that guy more reps in the cage, more reps on the mound.
Yep.
So being able to, just a huge data set we have from getting to work with so many of these guys for so long is so valuable in terms of building out those regressions and those expected metrics.
It's interesting because one of the success stories from this pro offseason was exactly that. Guy comes in, beast, like on all the athleticism, like all the jump testing, he's crushing it. He's like, in the pro data set, he's like one of the top guys. But is like, pretty notoriously has like a pretty strong track record of being not that great of a hitter. And was like, get him in, do skill work, like a lot of bat path stuff, a lot of whatever, but it's just like, it becomes such a clean argument to him to just be like, hey, look, here's what we're seeing. Like, you're incredibly athletic, and if we can just get you to be less inefficient, like you don't have to have a great swing, but you have currently a terrible one. And if we can just move you along, like if we can just do a few things with the bat path and a few things with sequencing, then all of a sudden it's like, that's like 7, 8 miles an hour of bat speed unlocked in like a couple of weeks, which sounds ridiculous, and is certainly like not a standard outcome, but is kind of possible when we start thinking about like, oh yeah, but that's because he's like one of the best athletes in the big leagues. He just needed to like unlock a few things, and that really I think does help with the buy-in on the skill side of things too, because then you can take it one step further and be like, because what you're talking about is like, we have these models that are like, here's what you should be swinging, here's what you are swinging. In his case, it was like, you should be swinging 73, but you're actually swinging like 65 or 66 or whatever. So like, okay, then let's go have a talk about your mechanics. Okay, here's what the biomech report is showing. Here's how your bat path, like here's how your bat works through the zone. Here's a few things that I think that we could try. But then the next step of that is like, if you can fix some of these things and like unlock 2-3 miles an hour of like batted ball or like of bat speed, then all of a sudden like, here's how many more barrels you're gonna have. And like, if you have this many more barrels, like here's what that does to your career. And then the other thing that is true is like, because we can execute this jump testing, here, but also in a remote environment, like we can monitor the athletic traits are staying elite for him, or if we're like trying to build them, we can monitor that they're growing. And then we can also check in on the on-field performance and make sure that like, that's aligning pretty well. And, like lo and behold, he's having a much better season this year than he was in previous years. And that just is like being able to tie, like, I think it's interesting, and something that we've put a lot of thought and effort into is like, if you just go to, any athlete, especially a big league athlete, but truly any athlete, and we're just like, hey, do a vertical jump test. They're just like, what? Like, why? But then because we know how the strength and athleticism side of things relates to the skill side of things, and we can tie those together. And then we know how the skill improvements tie to the on-field performance. All of a sudden it's like, hey, if you can get 5% more power output on this jump test in the next 6 weeks, you are dialed up to like have this type of season next year as long as everything else stays constant. And that becomes like pretty powerful motivator because nearly everybody's like, yeah, I'll take 15 more doubles. Like that sounds great. Like, and it's like, all right, get in the weight room.
Yeah, I think that way of putting it is super clean, right? Where it's like we have this great data set and these great coaches, and we know if you get this much better here, that means this. If you do this, this happens on the field.
Yeah.
And it's with this much data, it's empirical, right? There's no guesswork. And like you said too, the value of being able to test these things in remote settings, wherever athletes are, even throughout the season, super valuable. Because a guy like that, where they're physically super gifted, where we might back down a little bit on the weight room, we don't want to completely go away from it, because that's part of what makes that guy great, right? Is those physical attributes. And if we just trade that off, and he's no longer that physical freak, now he's just like a mediocre athlete that's slightly better at swinging the bat, versus we want to maintain the great and build up the good.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's how does that thought apply to populations of athletes who are not like, potentially like just Olympic caliber, like general athletes?
Yeah, not all of us can be so lucky.
That's right.
But I think the same thing applies, is just that threshold for where that like maintenance level is relative to like your level of competition. Like a freak 13-year-old or 18-year-old is still a freak. It's just they're not comparable to a big leaguer, but they're also not 26, 27 years old, right? So scaling that back to being to your level of competition is important, and also understanding where you need to be and when. Like a high school freshman, the kind of the dials between preparation and development versus that big leaguer are going to be a little bit different. Where for that big leaguer, a lot of their work is going to be focused on preparation, getting ready to play, maximizing the things that are going to show up directly on field. For a 14, 15-year-old, what they do in the fall isn't going to be that relevant to where they sign to play in college, or almost not even relevant at all for what they're going to do beyond that, right? Unless they're one of the like top players in the nation already. But what really matters is setting themselves up to be there when they're a sophomore, junior, senior, when they're actually teams are coming to watch them play. And over time, that focus is going to go from development. We're building that long-term athletic qualities, and we're focused on building structure, right? They're learning fundamental movement patterns. They're getting bigger, faster, stronger, while working at their craft on throwing and hitting. So that way, once it comes time, that dial turns to preparation, just like it would for a big leaguer when it's time for their junior spring or their senior spring. And what really matters now is what they do on this field, so that they have a chance to continue playing. It's the same thing as that big leaguer who what matters for him is to what he does on that field. So his team can advance into the playoffs. He can sign a bigger contract, all of that stuff that really matters. It's just the scale that's different for the younger guys.
Yeah, and I think we've got all this technology to measure this stuff like in our gyms, but we've also been working on bringing this sort of like testing capability to a remote setting, or like being able to do it at your house, without mailing you a set of force plates. Can you describe briefly like how that system works, or is different than what we do in house? And you've been extremely instrumental in building that out. So like, what is it, and like how did it come to be, and what happens when you test these jumps at home?
Yeah, so how it came to be is probably the best place to start. Like you said earlier, being able to monitor these qualities in a remote environment is so important, because almost no baseball player is going to be here for 365 a year, right? They're going to come in, assess, train for as long as they can in gym, but then they're going to go home, whether for the rest of the off season or they're going to go actually play baseball games, because that's what this is all about. And we need ways to continue that test retest loop so that that development is always either, whether it's a guy that's at a point in his career where that development still matters in season or not,
Yep.
we're still monitoring where they're at on these physical qualities, because like we've talked about quite a bit already, we know how those scale to the field. And so making sure that we're either progressing or maintaining, depending on where we're at in the year, is really important. And when a guy's not in the gym, like you said, can't send him force plates, but having that data, so important. So that's been an internal project for a long time of finding the best way to still be monitoring guys at home. One thing that is important to me with that is, like I mentioned earlier, when we're looking at these jumps, the most important thing isn't just the jump height, right? So by using video of a guy jumping, you could see like, when do his feet leave the ground? When do his feet get back to the ground? You can use some pretty simple physics equations there to see how long he was in the air. You do that, you can tell about how high he jumped. That's a really good start. That's kind of where we started. From there,
And that's kind of how the jump mat stuff works too, right?
exactly, yeah. So it's just using switches instead of like if you were using video, you'd be like physically identifying using your eyes where the 2 points of contact were. Jump mat's doing the same thing, just with switches, like on off while you're in the air, basically. But that leaves something to be desired, because one, like athletes are going to land in different positions. Like you're going to take off pretty extended. When you land, your knees aren't locked out, I hope. Like you're landing in a soft position.
That's right. We're not trying to have patella replacement surgery.
Yeah, and so you're landing in a different position that you took off, which is good as being an athlete, but bad for getting reliable jump height, because if you land even just slightly, knees more bent, hip a little bit more tucked, a couple centimeters here or there, and you're throwing your jump results off by, I mean, if you jump about our average for a college guy, about 40 centimeters, 4 centimeters isn't that much, and that's a 10% error in your jump height. So trying to find ways that we can get closer to getting that out, like we can with the force plates, where we're using the actual force into the ground to get jump height, was a big part of that mission. So where we're at with that now is using to try to take full advantage of where tech and programming is at, with like using computer vision to actually track things through space. So we're actually using the camera to track the body with a marker on it, to tell us actually how far is that center of mass displacing, like how far in the air is that body going. And when we have that input with things like body weight, and we're actually tracking that movement, we can get back to things close to like the peak power or the force production on the plates, which is, again, like those are the properties that we really care about, right? We're not looking for how high can this guy jump. That's what we're testing. But what we really care about is how much force is this guy putting in the ground and how fast. And so when we're actually getting some tracking and we're getting more accurate outputs, we can start to look back and scale back to those metrics that matter in gym.
So guys are like at their house, and they set up the camera, they do a couple of jumps, and then they upload that video, and we're able to see like, okay, based off of, how we're tracking you through this video, we can know your peak power, we can know like loosely jump height in centimeters, like all these things that we care about that pipe the models that we just talked about. So we could take peak power, and then we can get an expected velocity from that. And then we can still do the same thing, which is like, hey, your expected velocity is 86, but you're only throwing 83. So, you probably have some sort of like mechanical skill issue that we should address.
Exactly. Yeah. It's, you set up a tripod, have somebody with a steady hand hold your phone, you rip a jumper, a few jumps, runs right through, you get your jump height, your peak power, and your expected pitch speed or bat speed, depending on pitcher or hitter. Young guys will give them both. And then that's not really any different than the outputs in gym, except now maybe it's a pocket radar from your bullpen rather than the TrackMan running in your mocap. And it's the jump app instead of the force plates, right? It's the tools are going to look a little different to scale to that remote setting, but the methodology of how we're using that data is exactly the same.
Who do you think that I mean, you've been around here for a while. You've been an athlete training here, and you've trained a lot of athletes yourself. Like, who do you think that setup helps the most?
I think that I really think that kind of that younger to middle ground, like having been a high school, college, and playing some indie ball myself, like the the baseball season is kind of funky compared to a lot of sports, right? Where we have fall seasons, spring seasons, summer seasons. You're playing games for a lot of the year, and for a lot of guys, you're just kind of guessing where you're at in terms of that like long term development,
Mm-hmm.
and it can be easy to get kind of suckered into really focusing on the wrong things at the wrong time. Like
Yeah.
we're like focusing on winning fall baseball games rather than developing the qualities that you need to actually get a scholarship when you go out there in the spring. Um,
When you say
and
the qualities, you mean like tools?
yeah, everything. Like if we're thinking on the field, how you're hitting, how you're pitching, how the force you're putting into the ground, those everything that you need to develop to be ready to play at that next level. And that
Mm-hmm.
next level is going to be different for every guy. That might be making your high school team. That could be earning a college scholarship. That could be getting drafted. Um, it's going to look a little different for each guy, but being able to monitor where you're at, picturing like a graph with your actual velocity and your expected velocity. If you have that, you can see throughout the year how you're stacking up between that physical and that skill. And that, along with the context that your trainer is going to be able to apply, having worked with so many other athletes and knowing like, here's where you are, here's where you need to be to get to where you want, and map that out with those two components is huge. So I think
Yep.
that when you're thinking about those younger guys especially, you have so much time, and it's so easy to not make the best use of that time if you're not um, measuring and managing the underlying properties that are going to actually take you where you need to go.
Yeah, it's interesting because we have been lucky enough to train a couple of big leaguers who have force plates in their home stadium. So we've been able to set up monitoring systems like throughout the season that rely on jump testing. And one of the things that I thought was interesting, I mean, it like makes sense when you think about it, or at least it did to me. But then I just was not ever thinking about it. Is like we would see these guys come in and they'd go through like a short battery of tests like every day or like whenever they were home basically. um, and some of the things that we started to see is like, yeah, when guys are slumping, like, or their like expected bat speeds are going down, or they're like having a bit of like a rocky time navigating 6 7 innings, their tests, either from like the reactive athleticism tests or just like overall like power production, were just kind of tanking. And like I think that's an interesting thought because number one, it seems immediately straightforward. You know, like I say it and you're just like, oh yeah, of course, like guy's bat speed is down, like he probably is just tired or fatigued or whatever. Um, but that isn't how the guys were thinking about it at the time. Like, and it's not how baseball players think about it in season at all, which is just like, oh, I'm like 1 for 20. Like my mechanics must be off, or like, I must be da 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 da. And it's like, no, you just need to take a nap and like, it's like, no, it's simpler. It's like you just need to recover a bit better, and we probably need to do some stuff in the weight room to like like we've lost a bit of power, and so we probably either need to like maintain this or like try to make some small gains there. Um, but like that I think is very instructive to think about like how do you navigate a 60 game season as a D1 athlete or whatever, because you do get pretty like you do get beat up, and then it's like, all right, like why am I slumping? And it's like, your mechanics are fine, dude, like go hit, but just like focus on this stuff in the weight room. Like let's drop some sets and like spike intensity and see what shakes out.
Yeah, I think that's right on. And it kind of comes back to when we were talking about with youth athletes earlier with part of why this stuff matters is thinking about the components that are actually going into like how we move and how important like the nervous system regulation is in that. And when you're super tired or super stressed out, any task is going to become more challenging, right? Like if you're super tired driving home from work, it's going to be harder to drive home from work. Now imagine that's hitting a 100-mile-an-hour fastball, right?
That's right. That's right.
Like this
for
sport
sure.
is really hard. And so any like little incremental disadvantage you put yourself at in terms of these like reaction times and being able to fire as quickly as you need to are so exaggerated at these top levels, even college play. Things happen so fast on the field, and that's a lot of times when you talk to guys about like what does it feel like when your first at bats freshman year or your first at bats in the minor leagues, and they talk about like the game speeding up on them and needing to get up to speed. Things happen so fast, and if your body's not ready to process those things and react accordingly, you're going to be at a disadvantage and you're not going to perform your best. So it's just a matter of, like you said, those big league guys were able to actually like have those force plates, get those physical inputs, and be able to evaluate in real time how their nervous system is looking and get a picture of like how ready is their body to perform today. And not only that, but monitoring those things over time is super, super valuable, because everybody can get away with playing a little bit tired one day or dragging a little bit through the weekend. You didn't sleep super well.
Sure.
You can get away with that. But those things stack up, right? And being able to monitor those trends is really important so that we don't get to July and a big leaguer is halfway through his season and his bat speed's just been tanking. We got no idea why. We're measuring those points in between, and we can see and we can catch it before it happens, or when it starts happening, we can look at, is this happening because of your preparation? Is this happening because you're not physically ready? Or are you doing something weird in the box or on the mound? And for a college guy, that season's going to be a little bit less intensive, right? They're not playing 162, but you're going to class, you've got practice, you've got study hall, you have all these other stressors too, and those things matter. You're not going to be flying first class. Your team probably doesn't have a jet for most of our college guys.
That's right.
And so your body isn't always going to be at 100%, and that's okay. Like throughout a season, the goal isn't always to be at 100%, but I'd rather have you at 90 than 80%. And being able to monitor where you're actually at and understand the days that we need to back off, the days that we need to push more, that stuff's super, super vital in terms of getting the most out of you in season.
Yeah, and I think it charts this interesting thought process, because it's just, for one, like part of the reason why people don't think about it or pay attention to it is that there's just like not a number or a way to even like think about it, right? It's like, and this was true like as bat speed has come online, guys, because the radar gun was so like primal and available for pitching, everybody was like, oh, like, do I throw 90? And now it's like, do I throw 95? And like now it's, pretty soon it's going to be like, do I throw 100? But it's like, do I hit these like very obvious thresholds that are like round numbers that people like know? And then pretty soon, but then you go to somebody and you're like, hey, what's a good average bat speed? And they're like, I don't know, like 90, I guess, because that's good for pitching. Like they just pull a number, and it's like, well, like I think StatCast being able to put stuff out and like, this will start to get people to understand like, no, it's like 70, 75, 80. Like now we're starting to get into the elite levels here. And I think the reason I am going on this giant tangent of, how velocity has been recorded in history is like, what is interesting about the way that our system works now with being able to like assess your physical properties remotely on a regular basis in this like standard, pretty unbiased way, is that you can start to get a sense for how strong am I right now, which nobody has any idea of, because mostly when guys are lifting in season, they're doing maintenance lifts and they're not trying to push themselves for extremely obvious reasons that are totally sound methodologically. Like, you're just not trying to be like, I'm going to see how much I got in the tank today, right? Like, if you're a red shirt or like you're like on the bench and unlikely to see the field, then like, you know, you probably should be doing that. But like, you know, most guys that are playing are not like, I'm going to blow it out in the weight room and then I'm going to go play a 3-game series, which makes total sense. But, you know, every skill that you're not working on degrades. Like, some degrade quickly, some degrade slowly, but they all degrade. And so if you're just not like getting some training dose in, you're just going to like fade off over time. Some guy also, the other thing is like, some guys can hold that strength or that thing for longer than other people, you know? And it's just
Absolutely.
like,
Yeah.
and it's interesting because like we've made it cheaply available to the point where guys can be like, oh, it's my strength. Like, I'm just not as strong as I was at the beginning of the year.
Yeah, I think that what you hit on there with that, athletes are individuals and those properties are going to be a little different for each guy is huge, because we have these charts that tell us strength falls off after this much time, aerobic capacity falls off this much time, but those are all built off averages, right? And within that, everybody's going to be a little bit different, and depending on your training experience and also just like your general physiology, regardless of how trained you are. So being able to track your individual outputs is huge, because the average person might see a decrease in strength if they don't train it for a couple weeks. Yours might last longer. You might not need to train it quite as much. If you don't need to train it quite as much, you could be spending those reps on more sprint work, more throws in your midweek bullpen,
Other
more
stuff.
hacks in the cage, right? And so it isn't always just about like understanding that, oh, I need to get stronger. Sometimes it's, oh, I can back down a little bit here and spend this training economy, spend these reps somewhere more valuable. And sometimes it is about like kind of controlling that fall, is how a lot of us like to think of it in season, right? Like most guys, except for like red shirts, guys that aren't seeing the field too much, college schedule, if you're only playing on weekends, it can be a little easier to still chase a little development in season. For the most part in season, you're understanding that there's going to be some physical drop off from where you peaked in the off season. That's okay. You're going to get more experience on the field. You're going to get better at the skill side. But being able to control that and making sure that over the course of the season, you're going from like 100% to 85%. And you're not just going from 100%, I feel great, I'm good to go, and then you're coasting at 70% and you're restarting every offseason in the same spot. You work so hard for 3 to 4 months in the offseason, and then you don't hit it hard enough in the in-season that you're going
just the
up
same
and
guy.
down and up and down. And every spring you just show up the same guy, versus just a little bit of control and a little bit of measurement there can help you manage it to the point to where you're going to see some decrease in season. But when we zoom out, rather than just that up down, it's up down, but that long-term trend is going upwards.
That's right. Because like, you know, and I think like, I think we because of like where we're at, like within the industry, like we see a higher proportion of guys who come in and just like to train more than they actually like playing the games. You know, like those people exist. We see proportionally more of them, would be my guess. But they do exist. But like they're so anomalous because like all the fun stuff happens on the field. Like all the stuff that's worth playing for and all this stuff like happens on the field away from the four walls of this place or any other place, right? It's just like you can't be all conference driveline. Like you just can't. It's not a thing. It's not a thing. And so you're gonna, the standard way of thinking about stuff like forever and all time has basically just been like, I'm gonna build myself up in the off season, and then we're gonna do the controlled descent. You know, hopefully we land this airplane, you know, with no turbulence or whatever. But like, you know, a lot of guys just like don't pay attention to it, and they're like, all right, I'm gonna do this, and then it's like just like nosedive immediately because it's like, I'm in season, I can't lift. I'm in season, I can't do blah, blah, blah. I'm in season, da, da, da. And then all of a sudden, like, if you aren't if you aren't gifted in that specific way, then you could lose a lot of those traits quickly. And then all of a sudden, like, yeah, a bit of the power development that you recruited in the off season that did allow your swing to play up is now gone. And now you can't hit, or like, it's like it depends on what level you're at for like how thin the margin of error is. But like in specific places or for specific people, it's like incredibly thin.
Yeah, I mean, when you're thinking like we don't want to be either of those guys, right? We don't want to be the facility guy that is kind of addicted to that training, and I think that a lot of guys will fall into that because it's as like humans, we're wired chasing those rewards, right? And in a training setting, it's so clear, right? Like, oh, I'm going to go do my velocity day, and if I throw harder, that's a victory, and if I don't throw harder, that's a loss. Versus in a team sport, your individual impact, especially for a lot of those guys, I think are typically guys that don't see the field quite as often for their college or whatever. And so they're not getting any of that, like those wins and losses on the field. They're getting them in a training environment. And that's why I think that like what we do in terms of monitoring via like the mocap and the expected metrics of really, really paying attention to what scales back to the field is really important. Because like you said, like that is what matters. Like we train to play the game. We train to get better at the game. We don't just train to be better at training. And I think that setting guys up and being able to progress through an off season periodized on both ends, like working through the weight room, progressing from early off season, like trying to develop as much as we can, bigger, faster, stronger, late off season, getting ready to play on the field. Same thing on the mound or in the batter's box where we're progressing from on-ramping into velocity work and pitch design and live at-bats. And we're getting those simulated reps where guys are getting exposure to actual competition is so important because that's what everything needs to be wired towards is that actual competition. Because I think that like those elements and creating that training environment where things are progressing towards the actual field is so important versus if you're not testing and retesting and you're just doing infinite plyo velos or something like that and you're just trying to throw harder and you're getting to January and you got games in February and you're still just ripping plyo velos because you need to throw harder. That's where having a coach, a trainer, the systems that we've built out is so valuable in mapping those training rewards that are so important and so huge for getting those gains where guys are competing in plyo velos. They're getting super pumped up. That's not bad. That cycle, that training cycle just needs to be working towards something so that those rewards that guys are chasing, they matter in the moment for getting those training results, the training effect that we want, but they also need to build towards something, right? And then with the in-season guys that think, oh, I'll build up in the off-season, I just don't lift, so I feel fresh on the field. You can feel fresh on the field and still have lifted for 30 minutes in the morning, 40 minutes in the morning, or 20 minutes post-game where you rip a few sets of front squat or some dumbbell work or something like that.
Sure.
And guys have their individual preferences. We see it at a lot at the top where some guys it's like trying to get them out of the weight room more because it's like, dude, you are crushing yourself in there because you love lifting so much.
That's right.
Between starts that you might be able to go an extra inning every start if you stop trying to PR on trap bar every Tuesday.
That's right. Stop spending your training economy dollar where you're not making any money.
Yeah.
You're so far away from being a competitive power lifter and the money's not even remotely as good.
No. But if you go that guy that does 0%, 20%, lifting just 20 minutes 3 or 4 times a day, 30 minutes, or not a day, a week, spreading that workload out through the week so you're never too sore to play. You're not really feeling it on the field. You might be that first week where you would have been 100% if you didn't lift at all. You might feel 95% because you're a little bit tired from training. but you're going to be able to hold that 90 to 95% because
Yep.
that training volume is going to be consistent. That weight room is going to be consistent versus the guy that's not lifting at all. He's going to feel 100% week one. He's going to feel super fresh. But then week two, he's going to be feeling not quite as good, or he's going to feel good, but those outputs aren't going to be quite as high. And that's going to keep
feel
going.
good, play bad is like is common.
Yeah, because you might feel 100%, and that might be your 100%, but the problem is now your 100% is lower because you haven't lifted in 2 months.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
And like 90% of elite is better than 100% of bad.
That's right. That's right. What do you see as like the future of how this kind of like evolves and like gets rolled out?
I think that looking to the future starts to kind of look at like what we work with top end guys on already, which is a lot more specific, like athlete typing, of looking at those force plate metrics where we're not just looking at like how high are you jumping, how much force you're putting in the ground, but we're looking at little tiny things like different jump phases or the asymmetries of their jumps. We're looking at the balance of one jump to the other, like say the counter movement jump versus the squat jump, which where the counter movement, again, you have that momentum going down. It's a full jump. Squat jump, you start from a static position. The balance between those two tells us how much you're getting out of that loading, because that CMJ, that loading up, we're storing elastic energy. It should be like a trampoline or a rubber band. We pull it down, it snaps back up. Mm-hmm. Some guys are going to actually jump just as high without that as they are with that load, because whether it's because of how they built up in the weight room, just moving slow and heavy, they've lost that ability to translate that elastic energy. And so a guy like that, we can put into a bucket of, we know how to train him, not just to produce more force, but how he needs to go about producing that force, which is crucial, because he might already be producing, he might have a ton of horsepower and he's just not able to unlock it, because whether it's a nervous system thing or a muscular thing, he's not getting anything extra out of that rubber band or that trampoline. And he doesn't even need to produce more force. He just needs to almost train it like a technique where he just needs to do it differently. So understanding not just if an athlete needs to produce more force, but how they need to do it, and grouping these athletes by like what makes them great or what could make them great, that scales all the way down to the youth athletes too. The picture won't always be as clear as when a guy's already elite at the skill, and you can draw those conclusions a little bit easier. But every athlete's going to be an individual. But the more that we can group those guys and understand how those different groups, like the super elastic guys or the more like those meathead guys that function from the static, and understanding like, oh, this is this type of athlete. This type of athlete really benefits from these training interventions and this training timeline. And being able to put those guys in smaller and smaller and smaller buckets, with things like the big data set we have and large language models being able to help us process data in ways that we haven't before, I think is going to be huge in terms of like really narrowing those buckets down and being able to do a really good job of training the athlete. Because I think that like a lot of training, what gets thrown around is like sport specific, right? Like training for your sport. We really like to think of it as like athlete specific. We're training that athlete, because each athlete is going to have individual needs regardless of their sport. Those needs are going to be important in translating to their sport. But there's football players that need to get faster. There's baseball players that need to get faster. That's not based on what sport they play. It's relative to the sport they play, right? Like a top end speed for a kick returner that's needed and a top end speed for a first baseman are pretty different. But those two guys could still have the same athletic goal.
I don't know. I think Frank Thomas would be an excellent.
Can you imagine?
Just don't let him get downhill on you.
Yeah. Oh man, that's a fun picture. But those being able to really narrow those really matters, because we've seen that be huge at the big league level of training those guys just a little bit differently and unlocking big components in bat speed and not just like pitch velocity, but also guys being able to sustain it better by training the way that their body needs to. But if you think about like, okay, that gain is huge in one off season for a guy. Imagine that for a 14-year-old where they have 4 or 5 years before they're even in college baseball. Those compound gains are going to be incredible.
Yeah, you can stack them.
Exactly. Yeah. Like understanding how you move and how you need to move is so big, and the earlier we can get to that, the better. And being able to take it to these places where we're getting more data from remote guys, we're building bigger data sets, we're able to help guys that are training anywhere in the world with those things, where they're not testing on our force plates every 6 weeks, is massive in being able to plot that out and being able to get to those sooner. Where right now we can do that for a big leaguer, like I said. If we can do that for a 14-year-old, I mean, the compounding is going to be incredible.
Yeah. That's right. And the compounding, like, within the calendar year too, so that you're not like having to do this seesaw of like, oh man, because like we see it a decent amount, which is like, I came in last summer, I had a great summer. This year I'm going to go play summer ball, but I'm staying on the thing, and it's like, oh, why weren't my gains the same? And it's like, well, you're like spending more of your training dollar on like gameplay stimulus, and you don't have any monitoring on the back end to tell you, like, are you the same guy that you were when, you went to the Northwoods League or whatever. And that kind of stuff is important because, like, if you don't pay attention to it, like, at some point it's gonna catch up. Like, and if you're not paying attention to it, you're really relying on like luck for your career development to be like, oh, well, like, I got lucky because I got sufficiently strong this one off season, and then like it didn't degrade that much, and then I went over here and like my skills improved enough to offset this other thing, and then da da da. And it's like it's certainly a way to navigate a career. Many such cases, but it's not the one. It carries a lot of risk that is not maybe known or like can be seen, but like a bit of existential risk for just like, yeah, but if it breaks that other way, like, you're toast, like you just, you're the kind of player where it's just like, I just don't have these skills, and then all of a sudden, like, that's just it.
Yeah, and baseball is a sport with so much luck involved, right? In every instance, you can barrel a ball and it goes right to the center fielder.
Yeah.
You can execute a pitch perfectly, snap a slider off the corner of the zone, and the guy flips his end cap out and it drops over the first baseman's head. And we're looking to give you as much room for error as possible, right? Like, you throw that pitch with a little bit more sweep. You swing the bat a little bit faster so that your miss hits drop in, and those little points matter. And when we zoom out, we're not just creating those things on a game-to-game basis, but when you're talking about that, where a guy's going through that cycle of like, I get better in the off season, and then I go play from February through, I'm gonna go play summer ball this year, and they're getting back in gym for 3 weeks at the end of August before they go back to school, where it's really like, okay, we're gonna spend a week or two like getting your body feeling good again, and then a week or two getting you ready to go off to your college. You didn't really have a window to develop, because now you're playing fall games again, and you're going to have a few weeks in the winter. You're going to go home for Christmas break, and your coaches are going to hope that you're following the little packet that they gave you so that you're ready to play games in another month. And it's really easy to get stuck in that cycle where you're trying to make these gains in such small windows of time, that when we're able to track these things instead, whether it's the jumps, the pitch speed, the bat speed, more longitudinally over the course of the whole year, we plot these things, we measure these things, it becomes such a clear picture where we're not just relying on our actual results to tell us if we're doing a good job, but we're able to measure the process, because there's a lot less luck, close to no luck involved in the process, right? You work hard on a good plan, you improve in the ways that matter, it's going to scale to the field. That's where the luck comes in, but it's about setting yourself up as well as you can. And if you're not measuring these things, it's the same thing why, like, if you track your sleep, people who track their sleep more, because they're aware of how much they're sleeping. That simple awareness is huge. And you talked about it earlier with the radar guns getting people to throw harder because they can see a number. And now we're able to make similar things with the bat speed because we're aware of what a good number is. That stuff is huge, and if we can get that feedback not just from a box score, but charted over the course of an off season through in season and a year or multiple years for these youth athletes, where we can plot it out over almost a decade.
Mm-hmm.
That's so much bigger in terms of maximizing your career, because we're connecting those dots, right? We're not just guessing off of what happened.
Yeah. Yeah. The elimination of guesswork is, I think the theme that underrides the whole thing is like, you know, everybody wins when we can make better, more informed decisions that like help our athletes be as good as possible. So, thanks for coming on and explaining the ABCs of jump testing, Connor. If you're looking to see more about like where this is coming, either come out and get assessed. We'll run you through a jump test here at our gym. And then this particular feature that Connor was talking about our jump testing going out to all of our online and away from the gym athletes, that's coming in basically October of this year, 2024. So that'll be a staple of the way that we train athletes for a long time, and certainly something that we're looking to not only roll out but improve in the months and years to come. So appreciate you showing us a bit of the future, and we'll talk soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.